Okay, so reason number two that God probably exists is that the universe seems to have a designer. Now, this is the one of these that I'm probably the least versed in, so I'm getting it out of the way here. But it's nonetheless a really important part of the discussion on the existence of God. Wherever we look, whether we're looking at the largest scale of, the universe and galaxies and black holes, even right down to subatomic particles, there's this appearance of purposeful, consistent functionality in everything that we see. It's such a constant presence in our observations that physicists, theoretical physicists at the very highest levels, are having discussions around the apparent way that consciousness seems to be a fundamental ingredient in the fabric of reality. Obviously, not all of them hold to that, but many atheistic physicists are a part of that discussion right now because it's so constantly there in everything that we see. Even at the most fundamental levels, like the laws of mathematics that we take for granted that seem so ironclad and fixed. Well, why are they ironclad and fixed? Why do things just keep working the way that they do? Why does 2 plus 2 equals 4 every time? Now, that might seem so inane to ask, but we should be asking those questions. What if sometimes 2 plus 2 equaled 35? Or millions, or jelly, or who knows what? The thing just seems to work, and while we can describe the way it works, we don't really have scientific explanations for the way these things work. There's a whole discussion around the apparent fine-tuning of the universe. The fact that so much about our universe seems to be set just in such a way that life can exist here. From the elements present in our universe to things like the force of gravity. Gravity seems to function at a consistent force that is just right, so things neither fly apart and don't hold together or collapse in on each other constantly. I don't really get these discussions, but I've listened in on discussions about the kind of the strong and weak, I think, nuclear forces, things like this, just laws of physics that we take for granted that actually exist in just such a way that life can work. These are all functioning even in the atoms in your body right now. All of these things are sitting at just the right constants so that you can continue to live the way that you do. And then when you bring it down to the planet that we're on, planet Earth seems to be tilted at just the right angle, spinning at just the right speed, just the right distance from the sun, with just the right elements on it, and just the right things going on under the surface with the right salinity in its oceans and all these other factors that seem perfectly attuned for the presence of life on this planet. And then the actual nature of life on this planet is so hard to account for. The presence of DNA on planet Earth, the whole evolutionary theory depends on the presence of genetic code in every living being that can be replicated and modified and mutated. And the presence of that genetic code on planet Earth is really hard to account for. The idea that the first, simple single-celled organism that kind of emerged from the primordial soup had a code that described itself within it that could be replicated and modified is really hard to account for. Now, science is constantly unpacking our world and our reality and digging deeper into it and discovering more and more the complexities of it, constantly describing what's going on under the surface. And sometimes we confuse that for science explaining why things are the way they are. Science describes how, but it doesn't explain why, ever. Everything that we think is an explanation is actually just a description of deeper complexity beneath what we've seen so far. And the reality is, the question of why will never, science can't answer it because it's not a scientific question. The question why things are the way they are is a philosophical, metaphysical question. And so we shouldn't look for the answers in science. Science can describe the mechanisms that are at work. Things that we once thought were mystical, science says, no, 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 that's not mystical. Here's how it works. And it works in these wonderful, beautiful, complex ways. And those things are increasingly complex the deeper we go down. That's not an explanation. That's just a description. And we need to understand that science is not explaining away the existence of God. It is describing an increasingly complex universe in which the existence of God is a really good explanation for what science describes. Now, there is a whole way of thinking that avoids, as it were, the need for God in this system by talking about the multiverse. Just saying there's an infinite number of universes where an infinite number of possibilities are all being realized in terms of the possibilities of combinations of elements and the possibilities of the interaction of different physical forces. And only on a tiny number of those infinite universes does life exist, which is a plausible way to get around the need for God in explaining all of this. But here's the thing. It's not really a scientific theory. There's not evidence for it. The multiverse theory exists to make an explanation for what we can't explain. It's not that there's a bunch of evidence pointing towards the multiverse. It's that there's this huge gap in our understanding, and the multiverse is a comfortable plug for that hole. And so exactly what we're sometimes accused of doing, with the God of the gaps type theories, the multiverse functions very much that way. And so we shouldn't see it as a scientific rebuttal to the apparent design of our universe around us. Sure, it could be an explanation, but it's no more likely than the presence of an intelligent designer. And actually, I think we're going to discover there are other good reasons, other good evidences that uphold the idea that there is a person behind everything that we witness in our universe. One other thing quickly that sometimes gets thrown out there is that, well, actually, you're talking about the universe being designed to support life. Well, actually, much of the universe is inhospitable towards life. How do you explain that? How do you explain all the parts of the universe where life does not seem to exist? And all I'd say is that's only a problem if size matters. If you think the size of the universe, what there is most of the universe is obviously what is most important, well then that's a problem. But if size doesn't matter and if amount doesn't matter, so if empty space isn't more important than the habited space, well then that's not really a problem. There's no reason that all of empty space couldn't be out there purely for our enjoyment and our delight and for us to discover. That's not really a problem. The fact that there is any hospitable space in this entire universe really lends itself to the idea that this whole thing has been designed. And if it's been designed, then you have to have a designer. So there's another little kind of building block in the idea that God really might exist. Come back to me with your comments and thoughts on that, and we'll have some discussion on it, I hope. And stick around for the next part where we're going to start talking about the evidence among the human race for the existence of a God, and we'll see what that looks like. Thanks, guys.